Welcome to the Atheist in Recovery podcast, where we talk about finding hope in recovery. And now your host, Dr. Adina Silvestri.
Bonjour, guys, and welcome to episode 50 of the Atheists in Recovery podcast. And I can't believe we are nearing our 1-year anniversary. Happy anniversary, guys. I am equal parts excited and a tiny bit exhausted, but I feel like this podcast has taught me so much. I feel like it's made me a better therapist. It's given me an opportunity to meet individuals, artists, musicians, Buddhist monks, people that I would never have met otherwise. And for that, I am incredibly grateful. I'm incredibly grateful for the listeners. I'm incredibly grateful for feedback. And I'm also incredibly grateful for one specific listener who sent me my first fan mail. And thank you, person. I won't out you, but thank you. And that's what I'm dedicating this podcast to. My first question. So today is a Q&A solo episode. And the question, I feel, is probably a question that many of you have. So that's what we're doing today. And the question is, why do you ask all of your guests about their spiritual background? And so let's go into it. Let's talk about that. Why do you ask your guests about their spiritual and religious background from childhood? I feel when we tell our story, it helps to talk about our childhood. Guys, I am a therapist, right? Number one. But I also feel like, and I'm going to steal this from Brene Brown, but I feel like our stories are just data with a soul. And so in order to give a framework to the listeners, I ask about my guests' spiritual background. And it helps to sort of understand them and give them more of an identity. And, I also believe that a big part of who we are comes from that intersection between our deepest roots of our background, of our childhood. But whenever we find a root and follow it back, we will think we've reached its end, and then it will branch off again, especially if we've tried to block out parts of our earliest memories. And what happens when we try to block out or numb the pain? Well, I believe that's a major reason why we turn to addiction. And so let's talk about a few of these reasons why I ask each guest about their spiritual or religious background on an atheist podcast. I think it helps us to remember that we got sober by being vulnerable. We got sober by reaching out, by asking for help when we just couldn't do it anymore. And we just were so tired of fighting the good fight, or the bad fight in this case. We decided to get into a street fight, and we got into a street fight with vulnerability. And vulnerability won, guys. Thank God. Vulnerability won. And when vulnerability won, we swore we would never go back. We would never go back to numbing the pain. And as we know, when we numb the pain, we also numb the joy. And so we want to continue down this road of vulnerability. And research states, from the podcast and in my private practice and also in other arenas, that in order to move through shame, we have to be vulnerable. And shame comes with the territory. Yeah, all of us experience a shame at some point. But it's really hard to recover if you don't move through shame. And this is one of the quickest ways that I help people get sober. And so to be vulnerable means to be seen even when we're at our messiest, right? Even when we're at our most imperfect versions of ourselves. If we don't have someone who can love you through the messy, and it's not easy, it's not pretty, but if we don't have that, then we definitely look to a higher power. We definitely look to a spiritual healer, someone that has your back. And this is another way that I really help people that are struggling with addiction. It's to allow yourself to access that vulnerability. It's allowing yourself to be seen and know that you'll be loved no matter what. and I've said this in another podcast, a previous podcast that I'll link to in the show notes, but it's that dead uncle that loved you to pieces. It's, that grandma that would do anything for you. It's the people that got us to where we are today. We don't ride this rodeo alone. We have help. And so that's what I try and get people to access. And I do that in a variety of ways, and probably will end up being another podcast. But, I use a lot of hypnotherapy. I use a lot of alternative therapies in my practice. But in staying with this topic, let's move on. So another reason I ask about the spirituality, the higher power thing is connection. As I stated on my podcast, the tagline under Atheists in Recovery is, we all believe in something. And I truly believe that, in the over 50 interviews that I've done and the over 750 individual therapy sessions that I've done, everybody has a belief. Even if at first they look at me sideways, everybody has a belief, and I've heard it all. I've heard it. They believe in their dog because DOG is God spelled backwards. I've heard it all. And so what I've gathered is that there's one theme that persists, and that is that even if you acquired the secondhand smoke kind of religion while you were growing up, but something catastrophic happens, you will most certainly hit your knees. And you'll pray like you've never prayed before. And it could be to God, it could be to Buddha, it could be to the Dalai Lama. It doesn't matter. But you will pray. You will look for guidance. And it turns out that's connection. And I believe also that it's why AA is so popular. Alcoholics Anonymous. I believe that their literature is not, their outdated literature is not what's compelling. Right? I mean, that's not the reason that people keep coming back. It's the connections. It's the people that you meet in these meetings that are like you, whether you're atheist or agnostic, or maybe you're religious. It's the people that meet you at the door with a warm smile and know your name and are looking forward to seeing you and ask you how your day is, ask you how you're doing, and really listen to you. Really listen to you. We connect by seeing the same struggles. We connect by seeing the pain in others and the shame and the humanness. We connect in the joy as well. And so a third reason that I ask this question is, I feel like you could learn a lot just from this one question. So if they only answer one question, guys, then I'm covered now. That's not true. They will answer more questions, but it also leads to more searching questions, the questions that I love, the questions that I'm obsessed with, like, where do we come from and where are we going? I would love to have a future podcast that talks more about those questions. And so, and then a sidebar is people are quite creative. I've had Robert Cox, and I'll list his episode in the show notes, talk about his higher power currently being a Christo-Buddhist. Dr. Elizabeth Bonet also came on very early on in the podcast, say that it was something along the lines of a woo-woo Indian princess, these are scientific people, guys. And so I love hearing the descriptions about one's inner life and what informs their decisions and what makes them who they are. So I believe that's it for today's first, and hopefully not the last, Q&A. So thank you, listener out there, for sending in that question. And before I let you go, if you have not left a rating and review, please do so over at iTunes, and there is a link in the show notes. The more ratings I get, the more people I can reach with this podcast. And I would love to reach more people that are struggling with addiction, to let them know that there isn't just one way to recover. And so please go ahead and do that. And let's connect. let's definitely connect on social. You could also send me a email if you have a question, and we'll do another one of these if you guys like this. Also looking at doing a compilation in the future as we near a milestone number of downloads. I want to get some of my former guests on and just kind of have a podcast takeover. So those are just a couple of things I'm thinking about for future episodes. All right, guys. Well, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Atheists in Recovery podcast. For more great info and to stay up to date, head over to atheistsandrecovery.com.